Hello students, welcome to Notebook. The Berlin Wall was a concrete wall that separated West Berlin from East Berlin and East Germany both physically and ideologically. The Berlin Wall was symbolic of the Iron Curtain that demarcated Western Europe from the Eastern Bloc during the Cold War. In 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall was a symbolic end to the Cold War, which was further strengthened by the disintegration of the Soviet Republic in 1991. The Cold War ended not due to military actions or politics of governance. It ended due to the mass movements staged by ordinary citizens of Europe. We'll learn more about the disintegration of the Second World in this video lesson. The USSR, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, came into existence following the Russian Revolution of 1917. Ideals of socialism and the left-leaning urban middle class called for an egalitarian society. This attempt to ban private property gave primacy to the state and the organization of the party. Economic administration was planned and regulated by the state. The Soviet system was built around the Communist Party, which tolerated no opposition. The East European countries, the USSR, liberated after the Second World War, fell under its control. The political and economic administration of these countries fell under the purview of the USSR. The group of countries were called the Socialist Bloc, or Second World, held by the military alliance of the Warsaw Pact. The Soviet Union emerged as a great power after World War II. It was more developed than any other country except for the US. Apart from tremendous energy resources, it had a strong network of communication, industry, and transport system. A basic standard of living was ensured for its citizens by the Soviet state. Land, assets, and employment were controlled by the state. Childcare, education, and health was controlled by the state. The Soviet system of administration, however, became very authoritarian and bureaucratic. The absence of democracy and freedom of speech made life very difficult for its citizens. People expressed their dissent through jokes and cartoons. Most institutions of the Soviet required reforms. The one-party structure, dominated by the Communist Party, had excessive control and influence over all institutions and was unaccountable to its citizens. The party refused to recognize the desires of its people and was unable to manage most of their affairs. Though Russia was only one of the 15 republics constituting the USSR, it had a lot of power and dominated other countries that came under the Soviet bloc. The Soviet Union often matched and occasionally surpassed the United States in the nuclear arms race. However, it did so at a great cost. It was unable to meet the political and economic aspirations of the people and fell behind in technology, infrastructure, etc. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 further debilitated its structure. Wages grew within the system, but productivity and technology fell. Shortages of consumer goods and increased food imports also contributed to the downfall of the Soviet Union through the 1970s. Mikhail Gorbachev was the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in 1985. He decided to reform certain systems to keep the USSR at par with Western technology and information. However, Gorbachev's action had some unanticipated repercussions. Gorbachev decided to smooth relations of the USSR with the West. He also somewhat democratized the Soviet Union. This resulted in the countries of the Eastern Bloc under the Soviet Union to protest against their own government as well as Soviet influence. Unlike his predecessors, Gorbachev did not interfere when demonstrations occurred. This led to the eventual collapse of the communist regimes. Economic and political policies implemented by Gorbachev were criticized and opposed by leaders and members of the Communist Party. Crisis within also hastened the disintegration of the USSR. In 1991, a Soviet coup d'etat was attempted in Russia, also known as the August coup. This coup was supported by the Communist Party. The common people no longer wanted to accept a communist regime. Boris Yeltsin won a popular election in the Republic of Russia and emerged as a national hero. Power was soon transferred from the Soviet center to the republics. These republics began to recognize themselves as sovereign states. However, the Central Asian republics wanted to remain under Soviet influence. In 1991, under Yeltsin's rule, Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine declared the Soviet Republic disbanded. This also resulted in the banning of the Soviet Communist Party. Democracy was adopted in these sovereign republics. The disintegration of the USSR reached the Central Asian republics as a surprise. To placate them, they were made founding members of the CIS, Commonwealth of Independent States. Russia was the successor state of the Soviet Union and procured the Soviet seat in the United Nations Security Council. Russia was the only state to possess nuclear power and took measurements of disarmament along with the US. While some deemed the end of communism in the republics as the reason for the disintegration of the Soviet Union, it is actually the abuse of power, the suppression of dissent, and the general bureaucratic inefficiency that collapsed the system. Thus, economic stagnation, consumer shortages, and vulnerabilities of political and economic organizations were also contributing factors. Along with this, the aspirations and desires of the common people were not met either. In its desire to beat the US in the arms race, the Soviet economy used much of its resources in stocking nuclear and military arsenal. The development of the satellite states also accumulated a financial burden that the economy could not bear. The ordinary citizens of these Soviet states realized that promises made to them were not kept. They also were aware of the industrial and technological advances of the West. The Communist Party that had ruled over the USSR for 70 years was not accountable to the people. This resulted in their alienation. Slow administration, stifling of human rights, continuous corruption, and centralization of authority over a vast expanse was some of the reasons for the collapse of the system. Gorbachev had promised to address the very problems that had plagued Soviet society. However, the progress of his reforms was viewed as either too slow by some sections of the society or too fast by others. Gorbachev lost popular support as well as that of party hardliners. The demand for sovereignty and the desire for nationalism in Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, and other Baltic states proved to be the immediate triggers for the disbandment of the USSR. Though some critics, historians, and scholars feel Gorbachev's failure was the immediate trigger, others laud the rise of nationalism in parts of the USSR as the primary reason for USSR's disintegration. That is all for now. In the next part of this video lesson, we'll learn what the consequences of this disintegration were and how India situated itself during this unrest. See you soon. Till then, keep learning.